recording for this session. And I will now turn it over to the representatives from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Peter Sezoff and Keely Ducharme.
Great, thanks so much, Derek, for that introduction. So again, my name's Ducharme, and I'm the Municipal Advisor for the City of Kingston. I work for the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, as Derek has said, and I'm joined this evening by my colleague, Peter Sezoff. So thank you to the city for inviting us to this candidates information session this evening. We're happy to be here. So Peter is going to start off our presentation this evening with some elections basics, kind of a summary of the roles and responsibilities of elected officials, as well as the election process in general. And then I'll return to speak to campaign finance. So I'll hand it over to Peter now.
Thank you so much, Keely. Next slide, please. So first of all, I need to provide a quick disclaimer. These slides are meant to be a summary of some of the sections of the legislation and should not be relied on for legal or official purposes. I do want to stress that we are not lawyers and that you should always consult the legislation and seek legal advice when necessary. We will not be able to cover every aspect of municipal elections, but hope that this provides you with a better understanding of the process and legislation and improves your comfort level. Next slide, please. This slide outlines some of the topics we want to cover during this presentation. Firstly, the roles of elected members of council, head of council, and municipal staff, as well as the role of the school board trustee. The nomination process and how a candidate withdraws a nomination. Also, what happens if a candidate files a nomination and then changes his or her mind about which office they wish to run for. Some key dates to remember. Who is eligible to run for municipal office and school boards and who isn't. General campaign rules and election finances will be another topic covered in this presentation today. And lastly, some helpful resources where you can find information about municipal elections. Next slide, please. So let me just say that local government is the level of government that is closest to the people and is the most accessible and responsive to the needs of the community. It's a 4-year commitment that will be filled with challenges, excitement, disappointments, hard work, and a great deal of satisfaction. Ontario's municipal governments deliver local services, while the province establishes the legislative and policy framework. The Ontario government sets standards for many local services, such as land use planning, building regulation, and social housing, and provides funding to municipalities for delivery of some services. Before we get into an overview of the Municipal Elections Act, we wanted to provide a brief summary of the role of elected municipal officials and the role of staff. Much of this information is also captured in the online counselor's guide, which can be accessed on our ministry's website. Next slide, please. So first, let me start by saying that Section 2 of the Municipal Act stipulates that municipalities are created by the province to be responsible and accountable governments with respect to matters within their jurisdiction. And each municipality is given powers and duties under the Municipal Act and other pieces of legislation for the purpose of providing good government. The Municipal Act is the legislative framework for municipalities which seeks to balance local autonomy and flexibility with accountability and transparency of municipal operations. The key to any organization, government, business, industry, or local service club is for everyone to understand their respective roles and relationships. In the next few slides, we're going to review the role of the mayor's role as the chief executive officer, the role of council, and the role of municipal staff, which are all key to an effective and efficient local government. Next slide. Section 224 of the Municipal Act provides that it is the role of council to represent the public, to consider the well-being and interests of the municipality, to develop and evaluate the policies and programs of the municipality, determine which services the municipality provides, ensure that administrative and controllership policies, practices, and procedures are in place to implement the decisions of council, ensure the accountability and transparency of the operations of the municipality, including the activities of the senior management of the municipality, maintain the financial integrity of the municipality, and carry out the duties of council under the Municipal Act or any other act. Next slide. It is also the role of council to conduct meetings, pass bylaws, and develop policies. Next slide, please. Section 225 of the Municipal Act provides that it is the role of the head of council to act as the chief executive officer, to preside over council meetings so that its business can be carried out efficiently and effectively, provide leadership to the council, provide information or recommendations to council on policies, practices, procedures, and to ensure transparency and accountability, represent the municipality at official functions, and carry out the duties of the head of council under the Municipal Act and any other act. Next slide. As the chief executive officer of the municipality, the head of council shall uphold and promote the purposes of the municipality, promote public involvement, act as the representative and promote the municipality locally and elsewhere, as well as participate in and foster activities that enhance the economic, social, and environmental well-being of the municipality and its residents. And although the legislation refers to the head of council as the chief executive officer, the head of council actually has very few powers that can be exercised independently of the rest of council, except where specifically delegated in cases of emergency or in the context of procedural matters during a council meeting. The head of council has no greater power than any other individual member of council. Next slide, please. The role of staff is set out under section 227 of the Municipal Act. This would include implementing council's decisions and establishing administrative practices and procedures to carry out council's decisions. Undertaking research and providing advice to council on policies and programs of the municipality, and carrying out duties required by legislation or other duties assigned by the municipality. Staff should provide well-organized agendas with supporting materials, provide sufficient, timely information and analysis to make council's decision-making easier, notify council of changes to legislation and programs, provide advice on policy, including options and recommended actions, identifying the costs and benefits for the community in human and financial terms. Notify council immediately of any unintended or unexpected impacts of policy decisions, and implement council's decisions as effectively and professionally as possible. As you know, there are some municipal staff positions that have a statutory place or obligations. For example, clerk, treasurer, chief building official, and fire chief. It is important that council not interfere with the statutory obligations of these roles. Next slide. The role of the Chief Administrative Officer, or CAO for short, is set out in section 229 of the Municipal Act. The CAO is responsible for exercising general control and management of the affairs of the municipality for the purpose of ensuring the efficient and effective operation of the municipality, and performing such other duties as are assigned by the municipality. To help understand the role of the CEO in the municipality, picture an hourglass. Council is at one end and all municipal staff and department heads are at the other. The CEO is in the middle, which is the smallest part where the sand in the hourglass flows through. So if council wants to give direction to a specific department, the communication would flow through the CEO. Likewise, if the department wants to give information, reports, etc. to council, it too would flow through the CAO. Next slide, please. School trustees are members of the school board. They are locally elected representatives of the public and are the community's advocate for public education. Only the board, not an individual trustee, has the authority to make decisions or take action. A trustee is often the first point of contact for parents and community members who have questions and/or concerns about their local school. Candidates should contact the applicable school board for further information about duties, commitments, etc. Next slide. The role of a school board trustee is to establish policy direction and participate in making decisions that benefit the entire school board while representing the interests of constituents. Next slide, please. To be eligible to run for or to hold municipal office, you must be an eligible elector, which means you must be able to vote. So the list above shows voter eligibility as well as eligibility to run and hold office. You can only be nominated if, as of the day you are nominated, you are qualified to hold that office under the Act and are not ineligible under the Municipal Elections Act or any other act or otherwise prohibited by law to be nominated or to hold office. If a municipal employee wishes to run for office on the municipality's council, they must take a leave of absence before filing their nomination form. Section 30, subsection 4 of the Municipal Elections Act states that if elected, he or she shall be deemed to have resigned from the employment immediately before making the declaration of office. An employee of a municipality who wants to run for an office in a different municipality doesn't have to take a leave of absence or resign, but they should check with their employer to see if there are any policies that could affect them. Next slide. Questions about school board eligibility should be directed to the school board secretary. If you are an employee of any school board and wish to run for a trustee position on any school board in the province, you must take an unpaid leave of absence before you file your nomination form. If elected, you must resign from your job. You cannot work for a school board and be a trustee in Ontario at the same time. The following people are disqualified from being elected as school board trustee. They cannot be a clerk, deputy clerk, treasurer, or deputy treasurer of a municipality within the jurisdiction of the board. Any person not eligible to vote in the municipality. An employee of a school board unless they take an unpaid leave of absence and resign if elected. Also, like the ineligibility for municipal office, a judge of any court, a member of the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, a senator or a member of the House of Commons, and an inmate of a penal or correctional institution under sentence of imprisonment. Next slide. The first day for filing nominations is May 1st, 2022. Note that this is a Sunday, so unless the clerk has policies in place to permit electronic filing, candidates may have to wait until Monday, May 2nd, 2022 to file their nomination. The last day and time for filing nominations for the 2022 elections is Friday, August 19th, 2022 by 2 p.m. Now, a few words about withdrawing a nomination. Local election policies may state a candidate must personally attend the clerk's office to withdraw candidacy. If a candidate is in the hospital or incapacitated, this may not be feasible. If a candidate withdraws a nomination, they are still required to file a campaign financial statement covering all of the financial transactions made in the campaign. If they have not spent any money nor raised any funds, they can click on the box and sign the form, and it's complete. Next slide. Starting on May 1st until the close of business on August 19th, 2022, nominations can be submitted to the clerk from anyone who meets the eligibility criteria to run for office. Candidates must complete Form 1, which is the nomination paper, and submit it to the clerk along with the applicable nomination filing fee. The filing fee is $200 for anyone running for the head of council and $100 for all other offices. The clerk must be satisfied that you are eligible to run in order to certify your nomination. The clerk can ask you to show identification or fill out an additional form to prove that you are eligible to run for that particular office. The nomination form must have an original signature. If your nomination is not certified by the clerk, your name will not appear on the ballot. As long as you are eligible to vote in the municipality, you may run in any ward. If you do run in a ward where you do not live, you will not be able to vote for yourself, as you must vote in the ward in which you reside. Next slide. Municipal council candidates are required to obtain 25 nomination signatures from eligible electors on Form 2. Next slide. Occasionally, a candidate changes their mind and decides to run for a different office. You can run for only one office at a time. If a candidate files a second nomination, the first nomination is deemed to be withdrawn. If a candidate decides to run for another office and they have already collected the 25 endorsement signatures, they can use these endorsements for the other office. If a candidate decides to run for a different office on the same council or school board and both positions are elected at large, everything from the first campaign is transferred to the second campaign, and only one financial statement needs to be filed. Unless the candidate decides to run for a different office on the same council or school board, and one or both offices is or are elected by ward, the two campaigns must be kept separate and two financial statements must be filed. At this stage, I would like to turn the presentation over to my colleague Keely to speak about campaign contributions. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Peter. So as Peter said, we're now moving on to campaign finance and contributions. So the most important thing to note here is that campaign accounts are only required if a candidate intends to raise or spend money. So in the case of an acclamation or a campaign where no funds are either raised or spent, there's no need for a campaign account. Trade unions and corporations are not eligible to contribute to candidates' campaigns, although they can participate in the election as third-party advertisers or make contributions to other third-party advertiser campaigns. Municipalities are to establish rules regarding the use of municipal or local board members during the campaign period to ensure that both current and perhaps incoming or those seeking to obtain office kind of have an even playing field. This bylaw must be passed by May 1st in the year of the election. This will encourage accountability and transparency, so please ensure that you're aware of the municipality's policy when it comes to this. Additionally, the practice of municipalities providing candidate contact information on their websites is not considered a campaign contribution. Next slide, please. So contributions from the candidate themselves or their spouse are considered to have come from the same person and do count against the self-contribution limit, which we'll talk about shortly. In terms of donations from corporations, the rules for determining whether two corporations are considered to be one are clarified as follows. So if one corporation controls the others either directly or indirectly, then they're considered to be the same contributor. Also, if the corporations are owned or controlled by the same person or group of persons, either directly or indirectly, they're also considered to be the same contributor. Next slide, please. So candidates cannot accept contributions from the parties that are shown on this slide. In addition to the value of services provided, in addition to the value of services provided by volunteers is not generally considered to be a contribution. However, if a professional, for example, an accountant or a lawyer, does volunteer to provide services for which they would normally be paid had they not been volunteering for that campaign, market value of that service must be recorded as a contribution by the volunteer and is considered a campaign expense. Therefore, traditional volunteering like door knocking is not a contribution, but obtaining professional advice that would otherwise be an expense had this person not been volunteering for your campaign is considered to be a contribution. Next slide, please. So campaign contributions are monies, goods, or services given to a campaign given to a candidate for their campaign. So this can include monetary donations, like cash contributions. However, cash contributions may only be accepted up to the value of $25. Anything more than $25 must be made by check, money order, or by another method that clearly shows where the funds came from. So fundraising events can also be considered contributions, as the price of admission to a fundraising event is a campaign contribution, and a receipt must be issued for the full amount. Receipts must be issued for every contribution, whether that is monies, goods, or services, and the receipt should contain the name and address of the contributor, as well as the amount and the date. Next slide, please. So in terms of contribution limits, the limit on contributions to any one candidate or registered third-party advertiser is now $1,200. However, the aggregate amount is staying the same this year, and that is $5,000 to any number of candidates running for council or school board. So since candidates are required to inform contributors of these contribution limits, you may wish to include these limits on the receipts provided to those that contribute to your campaign for transparency and accountability purposes. Next slide, please. There are also self-funding limits, as I mentioned previously. So the self-funding limit for municipal council candidates is based on the number of electors voting for the office to a maximum of $25,000 per candidate. The formula for calculating the limit for head of council is $7,500 plus 20 cents per each elector. For all other offices, the formula is $5,000 plus 20% per elector. However, the highest the self-funding limit can possibly be is $25,000. So even if these formulas work out to a number greater than $25,000, $25,000 is the absolute self-funding limit. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, it's important to remember that if you intend to receive or spend any money related to your campaign, you need to open a bank account. So while candidates can open their campaign account with their own funds, according to that self-funding limit, a candidate cannot loan funds to their campaign to kickstart it with the intention of getting it back. So loans for a campaign can only be borrowed from a bank or another registered lending institution and can only be guaranteed by the candidate or the candidate's spouse. Next slide, please. So specific campaign expenses can include the value of contributions of goods and services, audit and accounting fees, interest on loans, the cost of holding fundraising funds, expenses related to compliance audits, the cost of advertisements, supplies, etc. And additional details on what is considered a campaign expense can be found in the Municipal Elections Act. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, payment of any campaign expense must be drawn from the campaign account, and a receipt providing the details and proof of that payment must be obtained. All expenses made by a candidate must be reported in the relevant financial disclosure form to be filed with the clerk by the candidate after the election. So with respect to campaign inventory, let's say you ran in a previous election and you'd like to use the leftover goods, so signs, office supplies, etc. You actually have to determine what the current market value for those goods is and what it would cost if you were to reuse them today. And these amounts do have to be recorded as an expense. Next slide, please. So as discussed, the spending limits for candidates is based on the number of electors. So given this, the clerk of the municipality actually calculates the spending limits twice. So upon a candidate filing a nomination form, so for example, you file on the first day, which is May 2nd, the clerk will calculate the spending limit based on the number of electors that were on the voters list as it existed September 15th, 2018, so before the last municipal election. The second calculation is based on the number of electors on the voters list as it exists September 15th, 2022, so prior to this election. This final calculation, this calculation will be given to the candidates on or before September 25th, 2022, and whichever of those numbers are higher, so whether it be the 2018 number or the 2022 number, whichever is higher is the final spending limit, and the clerk's calculation is final. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, the clerk will continue to provide estimates of what they foresee the spending limits being between the time of nomination in the beginning of May and that final date of September 25th. But regardless, the final spending limit will be provided to candidates by September 25th by the clerk of the municipality. Next slide, please. So although we've discussed that most campaign expenses are subject to the spending limit, those listed on this slide are not. So for example, expenses related to fundraising functions are exempt from the campaign spending limit. However, in order to qualify as a fundraising function, an event must have the raising of money as its primary purpose. Alternatively, campaign events at which incidental fundraising takes place do not qualify as fundraising events. Similarly, an informational brochure promoting awareness of a campaign or a candidate that contains contact information to make campaign contributions doesn't qualify as a fundraising function. So expenses that were subject to the spending limit if incurred before voting day are not subject to the spending limit if incurred after voting day. Next slide, please. So again, I know this can be dense on a lot of information if this will be your first campaign. So I suggest that for anyone considering running, that you familiarize yourself with the sections up on the screen now of the Municipal Elections Act, and also the relevant financial statements that you'll be required to file post-election. Additionally, once again, a reminder that if you do plan to spend or receive any money related to your campaign, that a bank account must be opened for this purpose, and that all contributions have to be deposited into this account and all expenses have to be drawn from this account. Next slide, please. So candidates are required to keep a complete and accurate financial statement during the course of their campaigns. All campaign expenses are to be accounted for and disclosed by the candidate on the relevant financial forms, again, post-election. All candidates are required to keep all campaign finance records until after November 15th, 2026, when a new council takes office. And these rules apply whether you are successful in obtaining office or not. Next slide, please. So just some best practices to ensure that your financial records are in order after the election and until that 2026 date. These can include keeping receipts, numbering receipts sequentially, receiving monthly bank statements from that account that you've opened regarding your campaign, producing duplicate slips or duplicate receipts so that you have a record of those as well, maintaining a petty cash fund, etc. Next slide, please. So these prescribed financial statements do have to be filed on or before 2:00 p.m. on Friday, March 31st, 2023. Next, please. Again, all contributions must be reported. The name of contributors who contribute more than $100 to a campaign must be reported on their financial statement. And the clerk is required to make financial statements available to the public in an electronic format free of charge. Financial statements must include an auditor's report if the expenses or contributions to that campaign exceed $10,000. Next slide, please. So candidates can close their campaign until January 3rd, 2023, and they can file their financial statements for that campaign until March 31st, 2023. Clerks are required to make all of these records public by April 30th, 2023, and a report setting out all the candidates and indicating whether the candidates complied with all the filing requirements is also made public. Next slide, please. So the candidate's nomination fee is refundable only if the financial statement is filed by the candidate on time. A candidate may resubmit a financial statement to correct an error up until this filing deadline. Next slide, please. So in terms of a surplus, when it comes to a campaign financial account, so when filing your financial statement, a candidate with a campaign surplus must pay the entire amount to the clerk. So prior to paying any surplus funds to the clerk, a candidate is entitled to a refund of any contributions that they or their spouse made, but not to anyone else. So the clerk is required to place this surplus in trust for use by the candidate if they need it for a compliance audit. If the candidate requires the funds for these purposes, it becomes the property of the municipality or the school board at that time. Next slide, please. So moving quickly on to compliance audit committees, every council and school board does have to establish a compliance audit committee, and the clerk is to review the contributions and to prepare a report for consideration by the compliance audit committee if a contributor appears to have exceeded any contribution limits during the campaign. If it is apparent to the clerk that a contributor has exceeded one or more of the contribution limits, the clerk would report this to the committee, and the committee would meet to determine whether to proceed with legal action. Next slide, please. So the Compliance Audit Committee is required to provide a brief written reason for its decision whether or not to proceed with legal action. Decisions of the committee may be appealed by an individual to the Superior Court of Justice. Additionally, any person who believes that a candidate has contravened the Municipal Elections Act or a contributor has contravened the Municipal Elections Act may proceed with legal action without having first approached this committee and obtained a compliance audit. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to my colleague, Peter Cizoff, to finish off.
Thank you so much, Keely. So a few words about the voters list. The preliminary list of electors, as corrected by the clerk, becomes the voters list on September 1st, 2022. The clerk determines how and when individuals can apply to have their name and information corrected or added to or removed from the voters list. The clerk can also remove a name from the list if the clerk becomes aware that the person has died. Next slide, please. One copy of the voters list can be provided to each municipal candidate or trustee candidate. Candidates in a ward are entitled only to have that portion of the list that contains the names of the electors entitled to vote for that office. Copies of the voters list are not available before September 1st, 2022. Next slide, please. The clerk may require anyone who receives a copy of the list to sign a receipt acknowledging the list is only to be used for election purposes, and any other use would be in violation of the Municipal Elections Act 1996. Next slide, please. Only a candidate may appoint scrutineers to represent him or her during the voting and the counting of the votes, including during a recount. In the traditional election where voting takes place at a poll, the Deputy Returning Officer, or DRO for short, is in charge of the activity in the voting place, and the DRO may ask the scrutineer to leave if the scrutineer is not complying with the legislation. Candidates or scrutineers should respect that the DRO must ensure fairness, access, privacy, and security of the vote. Next slide, please. A recount is automatic if the vote is tied. Councils and school boards have the option of establishing policies prior to the election that also allow for an automatic recount. Council still retains the option to pass a resolution for a recount within 30 days after the clerk has declared the results of the election. An eligible elector can apply to the courts for a recount within 30 days of the clerk's declaration of the results. Next slide. Here are several key dates related to the 2022 municipal election, all of which we have discussed throughout this presentation. So, voting day is Monday, October 24th, 2022, between 10 a.m. and 8 p.m. unless reduced hours are set out in a bylaw for retirement homes and institutions, or council has passed a bylaw to open voting earlier than 10 a.m. pursuant to section 46 of the Municipal Elections Act. The campaign period, or the time when a candidate can accept contributions and incur election expenses, runs from the date the nomination is submitted up until January 3rd, 2023. The deadline for the filing of the campaign financial statements in the clerk's office is Friday, March 31st, 2023, no later than 2 p.m. All candidates and third-party advertisers must file the statements, regardless of how much they spent or received in contributions. Next slide, please. To conclude this presentation, please allow us to share a list of helpful resources for the upcoming municipal election. The first link will take you to the eLaws website, where all provincial legislation is available online, including the associated regulations. You'll want to be familiar with the Municipal Elections Act, the Municipal Act, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and if running for a school board trustee, the Education Act. The second link is to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing website. From this site, you will be able to access the 2022 Voters Guide, 2022 Candidates Guide, and of course, the 2022 Third-Party Advertisers Guide. Once on the Municipal World website, if you click on the icon Bookshop, it illustrates a list of books that are related to running for a municipal office. They are available to purchase online, should you wish to do so. So at this point, my colleague and I would like to thank you for listening to our presentation. We also look forward to hearing your questions at the end of today's information session. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Peter and Keely, for that presentation. Our next speaker is Janet James, the Deputy Clerk with City of Kingston, and she will be providing more details about the role of City Council and some specifics for the election.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. As my colleague Derek said, my name is Janet James, and I'm the Deputy City Clerk for the City of Kingston. For the purpose of this election, I will be the Assistant Returning Officer and leading the coordination of the election for Kingston Mayor and District Council, as well as the 4 school boards in Kingston. For my presentation, I'll briefly cover the role of the clerk during a municipal election and provide you with an overview of the governance model of the City of Kingston remuneration for council members and important dates during the election. Next slide, please. Excuse me. During the election, the city clerk acts as the returning officer for the election. The returning officer has the ability to appoint other staff, such as the assistant returning officer and assistant election administrators, to carry out the duties related to the conduct of the election. Outside of the specific roles and responsibilities of the clerk also conducts the election based on the principles of the Municipal Elections Act, which include secrecy and confidentiality of votes is paramount. Elections should be fair and non-biased. Elections should be accessible to voters. Integrity of process should be maintained throughout the election. Certainty that results of the election reflect the votes cast, and that voters and candidates should be treated fairly and consistently within the municipality. Next slide, please. I'd like to give you a little bit of information about the City of Kingston governance model. Kingston City Council meets twice per month on the first and the third Tuesday of each month at 7 p.m. Over the past year, the average meeting length has been 4.5 hours. Council meetings may also begin earlier than 7 p.m. if there are items to be discussed in closed session. It's important to understand the difference between open and closed session. All meetings of council must be open to the public, meaning that the public attendance or viewership, for example, through live streaming, as has been done in the pandemic. There are limited exceptions for the requirement for open meetings with certain subject matters that are listed in section 239(2) of the Municipal Act being allowed to be discussed without the public present. That means in closed session. Examples of matters that may be discussed include things like labor relations or litigation or advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege. In addition to regular meetings, council may have special meetings throughout the year above and beyond the regular schedule. For example, multiple night budget meetings happen annually, and during each term, there are strategic planning sessions. Next slide, please. Under council, there are 3 different categories of subcommittees. There are 4 standing committees which report directly to council and 6 advisory committees which report directly to council. There are 2 advisory committees that report to standing committees and 2 legislative committees that do not report to council. Next slide, please. The 4 standing committees of council consist of 6 members of council each. These committees receive staff information and debate topics within their mandate at a more in-depth level and then make recommendations to council. Members of the public are able to make delegations and speak to agenda items at standing committee meetings. The Environment, Infrastructure and Transportation Policies Committee, the Administrative Policies Committee, and the Arts, Recreation and Community Policies Committee meetings happen once every 2 months, with the average meeting lasting between 1.5 to 2 hours. The Planning Committee is the 4th standing committee, and it's established to report to council on land use policy matters and Planning Act applications such as zoning bylaw and official plan minutes. The committee also acts as the host of public meetings as required under the Planning Act. The committee still also consists of 6 members of council, and it meets on the 1st and the 3rd Thursday of each month, and meetings last between 2.5 to 3 hours on average. All standing committees meet in the evening, and they start at 6 p.m. Next slide, please. The city's 6 advisory committees have memberships that consist of council members, members of the public, and representatives from organizations in the City of Kingston. These committees provide advice and guidance to staff and to council on areas within their mandates. As you can see from the list of committees on the slide, the mandates cover quite a wide range of topics. These committees meet anywhere from every 2 months to every quarter, and meetings last on average 1 to 2 hours. Meetings can be held during the day or in the evening, depending on the committee. Next slide, please. Heritage Kingston is an advisory committee which is established to carry out the responsibilities of the Ontario Heritage Act, including the conservation of properties of cultural heritage value or interest, with cultural heritage including a combination of tangible, intangible, and natural resources. Heritage Kingston meets monthly at 9:30 a.m. on the third Wednesday of each month, with meetings lasting between 1.5 and 2 hours. The Appeals Committee is a quasi-judicial committee that hears appeals related to the Property Standards Bylaw and the Building Code, as well as other city bylaws such as the Animal, Business Licensing, and Short-Term Rental bylaws. This committee meets on the third Monday of each month at noon, and meetings typically last about 1 hour. There are 2 members of council that serve on each of these advisory committees, respectively. Next slide, please. Council members are also asked to serve on the boards of a variety of external agencies and organizations. The full list of these organizations is included on the slide above. Next slide, please. And finally, a little bit about remuneration. In March, Council approved a new remuneration rate for the 2022-2026 term of Council, as recommended by the Citizen Committee to Review Council. To begin the term, the Mayor's remuneration will be $129,000 and Councillor's remuneration will be $45,000. A CPI increase will be applied annually to the remuneration beginning in 2023. A council member that serves as deputy mayor receives an additional $250 per month of service. Semi-annually or as necessary, councillors are asked to volunteer to serve as a deputy mayor. The deputy mayor fills in on official city business when the mayor is unavailable. Council members also receive an annual car allowance and are provided with city issue laptop and cell phone. Next slide, please. Openness and transparency are critical to a well-functioning and trustworthy local government. Accordingly, the City of Kingston does many things to meet these requirements. For example, all council meetings are live streamed on YouTube and are aired on your TV. All committee meetings are live streamed and post-meeting recordings are posted to the City Council YouTube channel. Members of the public are able to attend all council and committee meetings. During committee meetings, there are portions on each agenda where residents are encouraged and able to make comments or ask questions regarding the specific business item. Residents may also provide delegations at committee meetings and speak to items that are not business items on the agenda, but are items that are within the policy mandate of the committee. And all meeting dates, agendas, reports, and minutes are posted on the city website. The city is currently working to transition from a completely virtual meeting environment to a hybrid function, which will allow some members to attend in person while other members may participate virtually. Next slide, please. And finally, to wrap up my presentation, I want to let everyone know of some important dates for those that might be considering running for mayor, councillor, or school board trustee. Monday, May 2nd is the first day that a person will be able to file their nomination papers at the elections office at City Hall. Friday, August 19th at 2 p.m. is the deadline for filing nominations. Saturday, September 24th to Friday, October 28th is the time frame when election signs may be displayed on private property. Internet voting will be available from Wednesday, October 5th to Monday, October 24th. In-person advanced voting days will take place from Tuesday, October 18th to Saturday, October 22nd. Monday, October 24th is voting day. And in mid-November of 2022, the new council will receive its orientation. And November 22nd is the inaugural meeting of the 2022-2026 term of council. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Janet. I'd like to invite our next speaker, former City Councillor Liz Schell, who will talk about her experience as a City Councillor. Liz, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks very much, Derek. Well, you've certainly had an incredible amount of information. Many of you who are already on committees will know quite a bit about how the city runs, but becoming a councillor really is pretty huge. So first thing I'd like to say about all the information you've had, the staff of the City of Kingston will be really helpful. When that elections office is open, if it's not already, use them, because you do have a lot that you have to know, but they know it and they'll give you some good advice. So it's a very exciting time to run for council. And of course, if you win, your life changes rather dramatically. Your first meeting is the swearing in ceremony. And then you get down to the real nitty gritty, which is that incredible array of committees and boards that the deputy clerk presented. And you will be asked to sit on many committees. So there's a formula that you can put your name in and sort of jiggle around to try to figure out what you want to be on and how you'll talk with other counselors as you start to get to know them. But it is a lot. And if you work full-time during the day, it can require some time off to be on a committee that meets during the day, but many employers are pretty good about that. There are also lots of subcommittees for many of these committees you'll be on. So it is a lot, and guide your time well, because it can get a little overwhelming if you take on too much. You will be getting to know a lot of strangers to you, and need to start working as a team quickly. And it usually happens pretty well. There's a lot of goodwill amongst each other, lots of different opinions, but in general, we're all there to promote the City of Kingston and serve in its best interest. Again, get to know staff. Once you're a counselor, they will be your right-hand person all the way. They want things to run smoothly. You'll want them to run smoothly. So use the staff, talk to them. They'll be very helpful. You'll have lots and lots of information requests from constituents, complaints as well, but lots of the time it's information. And you won't know the answer. You simply can't know the incredible amount of work that goes on in the City of Kingston. There are the phone numbers, there's the contact us. And again, as a counselor, staff will be really helpful. If you know the staff member who's responsible and question them, you know, I've had this comment from one of my constituents, is it true? Is there something happening? You know, they will either tell you or tell you where to find it, or they'll find it for you. It really does work. There are lots of invitations. That's one that was a surprise to me, but you are a representative of your constituency, and you will receive many invitations to churches, schools, openings. You'll get to meet other levels of government representatives, which is really interesting. You can make some very good relationships with people from the province and the federal government. You might meet the Governor General, you might meet some officials from the province of Ontario. It's amazing how many opportunities you get to be with people that you've seen on television, and now you get to actually be with them and have a little chat and maybe do something formal. And that can be an awful lot of fun. The other thing that's really, really important is when you're a counselor, you are now kind of public property. So everything that you do publicly, everything that you write, all the little notes you take if a constituent calls you, those can be part of a public, well, they are part of a public record if requested. And it's important to try to be as, well, you must be as professional as possible in everything that you do, because being a counselor is extremely public. There are people who will get annoyed with you. They have avenues to take to express that annoyment. And it's important that you conducted yourself in a really professional way to stay ahead of things and on top of things. So welcome aboard. It really is a fascinating process to run for council. And if you win, it is life-changing. You'll meet a lot of really fabulous people who work hard as volunteers in the community, as staff members. There's just a lot of people out there that I didn't know existed, and I'm really glad that I met them. So good luck to all of you. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Liz, for giving that insider perspective of what it is like to be a member of City Council. So next, I will ask Jane Douglas from the Limestone District School Board to present and speak a bit about the school board election for that board. Jane, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, and thanks to the City of Kingston for allowing school boards to be present this evening. I would like to start with an acknowledgement that the Limestone District School Board is situated on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee. We acknowledge their enduring presence on this land, as well as the presence of Métis, Inuit, and other First Nations from across Turtle Island. We honor their cultures and celebrate their commitment to this land. We begin every board meeting with an Indigenous land acknowledgement, much more personalized in our regular setting, but important for us as it shows not only the board's commitment, but also our personal commitment as staff on our path to truth and reconciliation. Tonight, I have the honor of just briefly providing an overview for school board elections and to provide with you just a bit of information about trustees' roles. And of course, their role is to ensure the achievement of all students through their leadership and are responsible to the local board level. Next slide, please, Derek. We have a mission and vision and values, just like all organizations. These strategic priorities are developed by trustees in consultation with our community partners. So families, students, community partners, the broader school community. It underpins everything that we do in the classroom. And this is the function of our trustees to develop that strategic plan. As mentioned earlier, the compliance audit, the financial overview, is all relevant to trustee candidates. Next slide, please. Wellness, innovation, and collaboration are the three pillars, and we focus all of our educational work around wellness, innovation, and collaboration as it supports the emotional, mental, and physical needs of our students and staff. These pillars are the integral part of our strategic plan and strategic direction, and it is what trustees do. We'll be looking at the development of a new strategic plan and fine-tuning those directions this fall as part of the incoming board's work. And it is indeed quite a bit of work. Next slide, please. Trustees bring a range of skills and experience around the horseshoe. Many people ask if they have to be a former teacher or educator. That's not the case at all. In fact, many of our trustees do not have any formal background in education. The important part of being a trustee candidate, of course, is a call to public service and a desire to provide the best public education system to students today and into the future. Diversity in our representation around the school board is something that we're pursuing much more actively, and it is something that we hope to achieve. Next slide, please. The Limestone District School Board represents students and ratepayers in Kingston, Frontenac, Lennox, and Addington counties. There are actually 9 elected trustees, 5 of which represent the City of Kingston. We also have 3 student trustees who are elected annually. They represent students in our rural schools, our urban schools, and we have an Indigenous student trustee as well to represent that voice. They are members of the school board and their vote is non-binding on issues. Next slide, please. Just recently, a couple of weeks ago, trustees have realigned the areas for the City of Kingston. Over time, the electoral population has shifted in the city, as has schools. We've had some accommodation and some consolidation of schools. So trustees in the current term wanted very much to ensure that every trustee had a secondary school that they represented. So these are the new areas where trustees will be representing their constituents, and that is anticipated for the fall for this election. And so it has a few more approvals to go through, but we don't see any reason why this would not be the case of representation. And so each of the trustees will have one of the urban schools. So that's Bay Ridge Secondary, Frontenac Secondary School in the west, LCVI, and Kingston Secondary School in Central Kingston, and LaSalle Secondary School in Kingston East. Next slide, please. Trustees' responsibilities and who they are and why they are important. In fact, trustees are the longest serving municipally elected representative in Ontario history. They are members of the district school board, and they are required to carry out their responsibilities as it is outlined in the Education Act. There are policymakers. They set out the policies for the school board and direct how services are going to be provided within the school board. Obviously accountable because they are elected officials, and so they must balance the demands of their community and their constituents, along with the duties that are required by the Ontario Ministry of Education. And this often can be a bit of a balancing act with respect to directives from the Minister of Education and the Ministry of Education, along with maybe what constituents may wish to do. Their primary role is one of governance. And so they are the big B board, and the little b board is the operations. They have one employee, and that is the Director of Education. Next slide, please. The business of the board, well, trustees are expected to attend monthly board meetings, and there are several standing committees. Currently, we offer a hybrid approach. Our meetings are streamed and began being streamed because of COVID complications. We've been offering a hybrid approach where majority of trustees are in person, but some trustees may join those meetings virtually because they live in the farthest district, or they're working late, so they join from their workplace. So that's not uncommon. We will continue to offer stream board meetings moving forward. Every year, trustees elect an executive, so a chair and vice chair. And like their municipal counterparts, trustees are elected for a 4-year term. There are standing and advisory committees. There is an Education Policy and Operations Committee that actually is going on this evening. There is a budget meeting, which we are about to begin for the budget part of the year, and school accommodation, which is a consolidation and review of that involves school closures ultimately, or new schools being built out of that accommodation. And there's also an Environment Sustainability Committee and a Special Education Advisory Committee. There are also some additional duties that trustees can be appointed on, a number of quasi-judicial committees, so suspension and expulsion of students, the Food Sharing Project, which many of you know, and the Limestone Learning Foundation. There's also an opportunity for our local trustees to participate at a regional and provincial level with respect to the Ontario Public School Boards Association. We have private and public sessions. So private session, like in-camera session, is where trustees would discuss legal, personnel, or property issues. And of course, public session is the business of the board. Next slide, please. Trustees are responsible to be advocates for publicly funded education to the Ministry of Education and through various educational associations. Their primary focus is to promote student achievement and well-being, to deliver effective and appropriate education programs, ensure effective stewardship of the board's resources, including Ministry of Education compliant budget, which we're about to begin, and develop and maintain policies and develop and implement a multi-year plan that's aimed at achieving the board's goals. Next slide, please. Now, I know it is a lot of work and the compensation is not much, which is why I say really, our trustees really are dedicated to public service and recognize the importance of quality public education. The compensation is based on a base amount at $5,900 annually. There is an attendance amount that trustees receive of $1,200. And then depending if you're the chair or vice chair, because there are more meetings, then there is a top up that is reflected in the slide, $5,000 for the chair and $2,500 for the vice chair, depending on who is serving each of those years. We call it honorarium. The money for the base amount is tied to enrollment, so there is always a slight adjustment. And the current role of trustees will be looking at that honorarium. There is a slight increase in population, and so there may be a slight adjustment to that base amount. Although it's called an honorarium, that's a bit of a misnomer because the money is considered income and is fully taxable. The board also supplies trustees with a laptop and a cell phone, and there's mileage and professional development opportunities as well, as we would also provide professional development opportunities for staff. Next slide, please. I really do believe that being a trustee is a very worthwhile and rewarding experience. Individuals need to be committed to improving student achievement and well-being. There are a number of initiatives that trustees are currently guiding through, one of which is Equity Action Plan. They're really committed to seeing that through for the next several years. We're just about to begin a workforce census and belonging survey for staff. And we're coming to the end of the Kingston East Elementary School renaming process. Trustees a few years ago looked to rename that school, and they're committed to seeing that through. And they will look at the final 4 names selected by a renaming committee and students in the next couple of board meetings. So very active board as it pertains to advocacy and developing student achievement and well-being across Kingston, Frontenac, Lennox, and Addington. The communications department is your go-to first step, and there will be lots of information on the Limestone District School Board website. I thank you and look forward to any questions later.
Well, thank you very much, Jane. I'd like to invite our next speaker, Michael Murphy, who is with the Algonquin Lakeshore Catholic District School Board. Michael, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you. And also I'd like to thank the previous presenters. Thanks to Keely and Peter for providing some of that legislative framework on the role of the school board trustee, as well as the technical details around the election requirements, and to Jane for sharing an introduction to the more day-to-day practices of a trustee. As Derek mentioned, my name is Michael Murphy, and I'm one of the trustees for the Kingston and Frontenac Islands area, as well as the vice chair of the Algonquin and Lakeshore Catholic District School Board. At the ALCDSB, we cover all English Catholic ratepayers from Kingston in the east to Trenton in the west, from Picton in the south to Bancroft in the north. In total, we have 10 elected trustees, 4 of which are allocated to the City of Kingston and the Frontenac Islands region, in addition to 2 student trustees elected by student leaders at the secondary level. The 4 Kingston Frontenac Islands trustees are elected at large within this region. This means that all English Catholic ratepayers vote for up to 4 candidates from the list. And at the end of the count, the 4 top vote getters will work collaboratively to represent the region. Every year, similar to the case in the other school boards, the trustees choose one of their own to serve as the chair for the year, one person to serve as vice chair of the board, and one person to serve as the chair of the Finance and Operations Committee. In our case, these 3 roles function as the executive committee of the board and have some additional responsibilities such as moderating meetings and so on. All trustees attend our monthly board meeting on the 4th Tuesday of the month, and all trustees also sit on our 2 standing committees, the Issues and Directions Committee and the Finance and Operations Committee, which both meet on the 2nd Tuesday of the month. Most trustees will sit on 2 or 3 additional committees, and these vary widely in their frequency. Some committees will meet once annually, some will meet monthly, and others will meet following different schedules. For example, our audit committee follows the audit cycle, and other committees have responsibilities around particular times of the year, like graduation. From time to time, and a little bit more so now that the pandemic is winding down, trustees are invited to attend school and community events, such as back-to-school barbecues, public speaking nights, fundraisers, sporting events, and so on. Another important element of the role of trustee is to serve as a kind of midpoint between the public and the school board. Through my term, I've received calls, emails, and even some letter mail from parents and community members on a variety of issues. Trustees bring parent and community concerns to administration and to board deliberations, while also helping parents and community members to receive information about board decisions and policies. Finally, Algonquin Lakeshore Catholic District School Board trustees are members of the Ontario Catholic School Trustees Association. We participate in policy development efforts through that provincial association, and we also have professional development opportunities through there. Thank you for the invitation to participate here. I'm happy to answer any questions on the role.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Michael. And now I would like to introduce our final speaker for the evening, Jason Dupuis, who is with the Conseil des Écoles Catholiques du Centre-East. Jason, you may go ahead when you are ready.
Merci, Derek. I'm trying to start my camera and it says the host has stopped it. There we go.
I've just sent you. There you go, Jason. I'll get your presentation on the screen.
I thought you were shunning me out from this. Thank you very much, Derek, for having us. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for everything that has been brought forward here this evening. And you have a good idea of the role that trustees play. So I will take a few minutes to talk about our school board. Donc, bonsoir tout le monde. And I want to mention to everyone that it will be presented in French because we are a French language school board. Donc, bonsoir tout le monde. Merci de votre présence ce soir. Mon nom est Jason Dupuis, surintendant au Conseil des écoles catholiques du Centre-Est. Et je vais prendre quelques minutes pour vous parler un petit peu de notre conseil. Je pense que les gens ce soir vous ont présenté le rôle des conseillères, des conseillers scolaires et je demeure disponible aussi pour répondre aux questions en lien avec certaines particularités de notre conseil, mais ça ressemble beaucoup à ce qui a été présenté ce soir. Donc, j'ai l'intention de vous présenter le conseil, puis un petit peu parler aussi de la nouvelle planification stratégique qui a été lancée en 2021 et qui s'échelonne pour les 5 prochaines années. You can go to the third slide, Derek. Donc, essentiellement, le Conseil des écoles catholiques du Centre-Est, on voit ici à la diapositive nos statistiques, plus de 26 000 élèves, 45 écoles élémentaires, 1 ou 2 projets de construction, 13 écoles secondaires. Et puis, évidemment, c'est un conseil très vibrant, très impliqué, toujours à la recherche de mettre en place des nouveaux programmes et toujours à l'écoute des élèves, bien entendu. Et les conseils scolaires jouent un rôle important dans cette organisation, qui d'ailleurs est le plus grand conseil scolaire de langue française à l'extérieur de la province du Québec. Next slide, please. Donc, rapidement, comme ça a déjà été mentionné, là, donc, les mandats des conseillers scolaires, ils sont en place pour 4 ans. Vous jouez un rôle important au niveau de la saine gouvernance du conseil. Vous aidez l'administration à viser, à établir et à atteindre les visées du plan stratégique, à évaluer l'organisation au niveau de sa performance et évidemment de jouer un rôle important au niveau de la liaison avec les 3 paliers de gouvernement qui sont en place. Next slide, Derek. Donc, comme vous le savez, il y a une élection qui va se dérouler au mois d'octobre. Donc, c'est pour ça qu'on est ici ce soir, pour vous donner un petit aperçu de qui nous sommes. Et on the next slide, Derek. Donc, à la prochaine diapo, on vous partage que notre conseil comporte 11 secteurs électoraux, donc 8 qui sont principalement situés à Ottawa et 3 à l'extérieur de la ville. Le secteur qui est représenté ce soir, c'est le secteur qui touche les régions de Frontenac, Hastings, Prince Edward, Lennox et Addington. Vous avez dans la présentation qui sera sur le site web aussi la carte du territoire. C'est un très, très grand territoire. On part de l'est d'Ottawa jusqu'à la région de Trenton, Quinte West. Et pour le secteur de Kingston, nous avons 2 écoles, une école élémentaire et une école secondaire qui fait partie du territoire de Kingston. Donc, quelques minutes. Next slide, Derek. Or actually, yeah, one more slide. Rapidement, vous voyez ici la nouvelle mission du Conseil, donc imprégnée de nos valeurs catholiques. Le CCCA inspire chaque élève à découvrir ses passions, à développer ses talents et à s'investir dans l'humanité. Puis, c'est un exercice auquel les conseillers scolaires ont participé grandement. Chaque mot est pesé, chaque mot est analysé, car il y a une portée. Donc, c'est la nouvelle mission qui va nous amener vers la fin de cette planification stratégique échelonnée sur 5 ans. Next slide, Derek. Vous voyez ici maintenant notre vision, donc des chefs de file d'une communauté scolaire francophone plurielle, inclusive et vibrante, reconnue pour l'excellence de la pédagogie transformée et la bienveillance de ces écoles. Évidemment, c'est aussi, ça a été un processus dans lequel les conseillers scolaires actuels ont participé pour nous amener à ce renouveau-là de notre vision. Next slide, please, Derek. Donc, vous voyez ici les valeurs qui habitent l'organisation au complet, non seulement l'administration, mais les employés. Et on veut que ça découle dans nos salles de classe, dans nos écoles. Donc, la compassion, la passion et l'engagement, c'est 3 valeurs très, très importantes pour le conseil. Next slide, Derek. Un autre élément qui nous oriente grandement, c'est le profil de sortie de l'élève, donc qui se décale en 3 volets. Donc, on cherche de développer des élèves lorsqu'ils quittent le système en 12e année, des élèves qui sont affirmés, épanouis, qui sont engagés, éthiques et critiques et créatifs. Donc, l'administration dépose régulièrement des données en lien avec les cibles qu'on souhaite atteindre. Puis la table politique, ben, vous jouez un rôle important là, et vous pouvez questionner et comprendre quelles sont les données, sur quoi on se base pour déterminer si on est en train d'atteindre nos cibles. Donc, pour nous, le profil de sortie qui a été adapté légèrement pour cette nouvelle planète stratégique, c'est un document très important pour notre organisation. Et next slide, Derek. Et pour terminer, le plan stratégique est aussi décalé sur 4 piliers importants. Ils sont ici devant vous. À l'intérieur de chacun des piliers, on a des objectifs stratégiques très, très précis qui permettent aux écoles d'appuyer le conseil scolaire pour atteindre ces piliers-là. Donc, très hâte de partager avec les nouveaux conseillers scolaires et conseillers scolaires les différents objectifs qui font partie des piliers du plan stratégique. Là. Donc, évidemment, il y a un volet sur la pédagogie, un volet sur le bien-être, l'équité, l'inclusion. On veut élaborer, travailler sur une synergie forte avec la communauté catholique et francophone. Et au niveau de l'organisation, on va être plus souple, éco-responsable et être dynamisé par notre richesse humaine. Donc, c'est 4 piliers qui sont très, très, très importants. Next slide, Derek. Donc, si vous voulez en savoir davantage, vous pouvez suivre nos séances, nos ordres du jour, nos comptes rendus sont affichés sur le site web si ça vous intéresse. Aussi pour connaître les différents comités qui existent sur lesquels siègent les conseillères et conseillers scolaires. Ils sont disponibles sur le site. Donc, je tiens à vous remercier. Thank you very much, Derek. You can go to the last slide. Je demeure disponible pour répondre aux questions, tout comme les autres personnes qui sont présentes ici ce soir. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.